Productive Pastor 60 Assimilation Systems Part 2. What's going on, friends? Welcome back, Productive Pastor. I'm going to continue this conversation about assimilation systems. I want to talk about that a little bit before we jump into this. Last episode, 59, was about the how and the what and the why, really. Not the how, the what and the why of assimilation systems. And I'll be honest with you, a couple things going on. Number one, when I release that episode, it's like I'm feeling like we're leaving some things hanging here. Number two, there was a fantastic episode about assimilation systems and building those out in Trello in iteration 1 of Productive Pastor years and years ago. 3 is like, man, I want to come back to this a little bit more because it's so important and so crucial. And so this week, a couple things, other things going on. This is complex, y'all. If you hadn't figured this out yet. You know, super busy. Digging back into my old archives, getting ready for the Trello course. And one of the things that we're going to build as part of the Trello course is how to use Trello for assimilation systems. And I'm going back in the archives. I'm pulling the audio out from this old episode, getting this ready, listening to it and thinking, wow, this is actually really good content. And I don't want to just be a jerk and put it behind a pay filter if somebody's interested in it. So what I'm about to play is like an old episode. This is probably 7 years ago, maybe, with my friend Allison Saul Sykes. She was my associate pastor years ago. She now is the incoming pastor of St. Francisville UMC here in Louisiana. Great pastor, married to a good friend of mine, Brandon, all these sorts of things. And so you're going to hear us talk through what was a really complex assimilation system that worked really well. And if you remember back in the last episode, I talked about how these things have gotten too complex. And I would say that this is a pretty complex system, but I think it's interesting because this is what I want you to do, not to try to replicate the whole thing, but just to listen to the intentionality that's behind it. Because like I said in the last episode, this is not a commitment to a specific system. This is a commitment to intentionality. I'm going to talk about show notes a lot. I'm going to reference a lot of previous things in this episode that are not there. You know, the show notes for this episode, revchadbrooks.com/ppp/060. I'm going to just go ahead and try to pull as much stuff as I can off the Wayback Machine and have in here if you want to see this. But just consider this a deeper dive, more specifically into the how of assimilation and also the thinking behind it, all of those sorts of things. And so we're going to roll this old school episode from back in the day. Hope this content is helpful, and I will be back on the prior back end of things to talk about this more. Well, welcome. I've got Allison Sauls here with me. Allison's another one of our pastors here at Foundry. And I decided that for this conversation today, since she does so much of this work with us, I would just rather have her as part of it. So, Allison, what's up?
Hey, glad to be here.
So we are big fans of systems at Foundry. We found them to be incredibly helpful for our ministry, mainly because they remind us of what's going on and that we can intentionally design something and then we can make sure we can repeat it. Allison, had you worked with systems that much really before you got here?
In bits and pieces, more in my work in nonprofits outside of the church, but it makes so much sense inside the church.
Yeah. And I think that the biggest thing with systems, I tell people, is that it's a repeatable progression of tasks.
Right.
And it's just there so you don't forget something.
Right. Nothing falls through the cracks.
Yeah. Because that's also Allison. Allison knows a lot of things fall through my cracks.
Not necessarily, but it's helpful to have things to help us all out as a team.
Yeah. But it's just, and like you said something earlier when we were talking about this, about it's almost like a mentality.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just sort of helps keep the things that are important to be able to continue to be most important, and everything sort of be in line, and everybody know what's happening, and be able to communicate more easily with folks inside of our team and folks outside of our team.
Yeah, and I think I think like the magic word, if this was Pee-wee's Playhouse, the word of the day, you're too young to remember Pee-wee's Playhouse, aren't you?
I know what Pee-wee's Playhouse is.
Okay. Would be intentionality.
Yes, absolutely.
The chair, like it screamed. Okay. I was going to try that out. All right. And so what we're going to talk about today is our assimilation systems, and how we deal with first time guests. It's not how we process and move them forward.
Right.
And so, a couple of episodes ago, I think it was episode 45 or 46, I talked about using Trello for ministry. I wrote a blog post to outline how we use Trello for this assimilation, but we're going to actually dig down even deeper, and we're going to talk about kind of like the larger framework of our assimilation strategy. And a lot of this is going to deal with first-time guests, do some stuff on second-time guests, and then we're going to talk about our email system, our Facebook systems, and our first-time giving systems. And so, Allison, but since you're kind of your technical title is Pastor of Connections,
Correct.
You see this data come through a lot, and a lot of these kind of things. Another reason I want Allison on today is a lot of this is it's stuff that I've helped create and I've come up with, but Allison is a great implementer.
Yeah, I think that's true to some extent. One of our mutual friends said that you and your vision was the big end of the funnel, and I was the little end of the funnel as I implement some of these systems. But I think the coolest thing about some of these assimilation systems is that connection piece, that we get a lot of data, but every bit of data is connected to a person and a story and a narrative that wants to be a part of Foundry. And many of these folks, by going through these systems, have become vital parts of Foundry because of these systems that we've implemented.
What do you think this sounds horrible to talk about success ratio. Like when someone is able to actually move all the way through and all the boxes are checked on their first time visitor, like what do you think is the likelihood or the percentage of those people we see a second time?
I don't know if I would put a number to it, but really high.
Yeah.
Like super high.
And the kicker is, and we're going to talk about some of the sneaky ways to do this later on, because I sent an email to some of the email lists earlier and asked them questions about stuff, and tons of folks just asked, like, how on earth are you getting information? And so we're going to talk about that later on, because that really is a silver bullet. Like, if you can't get their information, you're in trouble.
It's hard.
And so there's a couple of things that you can do to ensure that we're going to talk about later on. And so our larger framework of assimilation is really based off of day of. Okay, and so the big thing that we have to do is we have to make sure we get information. And so we give away a tumbler, and we tell people at the front of the service, hey, make sure you do this. At the back of the service, in the closing, normally says something again.
A reminder
to our guests.
Fill out our connection cards with all of your data on there.
Yeah.
Their data on there.
And this on there. And I'll have a picture of those in the show notes for folks to look at those. And so we grab their information. And then normally Sunday afternoon, you start processing this. So kind of walk us through what you do.
Yeah, so I get all these connection cards and sort of siphon out all of the folks that are first or second time guests and make sure they're in our larger contact sort of data system, which right now is essentially a large spreadsheet. And so that's the first step.
And we're just using Google Docs. We're not paying we're not paying money for a church management system or a church database system.
It's pretty simple, very user friendly, but it keeps everything in order there. And then the next step essentially is to move into our Trello system, into our first time guests, and then moving folks from that place over to second time if it's their second Sunday, or into regular if that's the case.
Yeah, and that's what, and I wrote a blog post about this. I've talked about it before, but the strength of that Trello system is just the fact that you can, and we're not taking advantage of that much linked information necessarily with this piece, but just how easy it is to move somebody from one stack to the next stack. And it's just click and drag.
Click
and drag. And then I'm looking inside of our Trello, the checklist is, we need to add something in there.
We do.
We need to add something there. So there's a checklist that drops into that person. And Allison goes ahead. She puts that name, their families, the date. Mm-hmm. And then the checklist thing is easy because you just create that checklist one time and you copy it over every single time.
Right.
And so our checklist right now consists of Facebook invite Chad, Facebook invite Allison, a handwritten note that I send out, a Facebook message from Allison, and then we enter into the email system. And my wife actually is doing that now. We're going to talk about the email system later on. And then we also have a package we send them. Mm-hmm. And so the package needs to go into the Trello list.
It does.
And so all of that has been... How long have we actually been had this as like canon law that we do this?
I think I would say it's like this since the very beginning of 2016 because we were pushing it out in our retreat.
Yeah.
And then we started full blast January.
And so I've always done a note.
Yes.
but that could come any point in time.
Right. And we just recognized that we were having a lot of overlap, and
Yeah.
you didn't quite know who was being contacted, and I didn't quite know, and Molly
Yeah.
didn't quite know, and so this has just completely streamlined everything.
It just goes all right there. And so the pieces of that, the production pieces of that are just a Facebook invite. And I'm going to tell you right now, the weird rule that people have about pastors not sending friend requests needs to burn and die. Because
How do you really feel about that?
it needs to burn and die. Because the amount of people, especially if your visitors are under 40, and especially if they're women under 35,
Yeah.
they live on Facebook. I mean, just absolutely live on Facebook. So that's not an odd thing at all to get that. So take full advantage of that Facebook invite. And we're going to talk more about our Facebook system coming up. And so there's that goes on. Allison has all that ready pretty much on Sunday night, right? And
Yes.
so Monday, I'm writing letters on Monday. Now, sometimes we won't be able to get their information,
Right.
but
We have a backup. One other helpful information sort of pathway is our kids check-in system that has proven helpful to determine who's at church. And then, but
because there's a lot of times that we have families that will not fill out a connection card.
right,
But they got to check
they
that
have
kid
to
in.
check their kid in. So
And then so if you're not checking in your kids for your nursery, you might feel like you don't need it for a security reason or anything like that, but it is worth the investment just to gather the information, I think. Like just from a data standpoint, and it probably cost us $800.
total to cook that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole 9 yards rolling. It costs like $800. So it's absolutely worth it. And so when we get those names, our only gripe, we use Planning Center, kids
do.
check in. And our only gripe is it does not have a thing. It does not require them to leave their address.
Right.
But there's whitepages.com.
There is white page, and there's Facebook.
And there's Facebook. And you can find an address. I mean,
Yes.
you go out there, and so you're able to build this contact list for your first-time visitors. And so they're getting a handwritten letter from me that's usually being mailed. I've actually changed that up because of our package.
Right.
I normally mail those on Tuesday or Wednesday now. But they're getting a Facebook invite from me if we already aren't friends. And if I am friends with them already, I shoot them a message Sunday afternoon, early Monday morning. They're getting that invite and stuff. The card I send them is pretty quick, pretty basic. If I know them, I try to personalize it. If not, it probably takes me 45 seconds to write those. Allison, what's your basic Facebook message look like for a first-time visitor?
Often it's like, hey, I'm Allison, one of the pastors at Foundry. It was great to have you. And often if I didn't have a chance to meet them in person, like, look forward to meeting you in the future. If you have any questions or if there's anything we can do for you, please don't hesitate to let us know. Here's my email. You can contact me via Facebook or Chad this way.
Yeah. So how many times do you get an email back from that person, not a Facebook message?
Like, very rarely.
How many replies do you get on Facebook messages?
90% of
Yeah,
people
I'd say-
respond at some point.
Yeah, about that. That Facebook message thing is just critical. And so that goes on, and then we have our new package
Right.
that goes out. So it has a few pieces of printed literature, very simple. We're not overwhelming them.
Right.
We're not giving them 80,000 things.
No.
It has a handwritten note from one of our church members,
Yes.
which is cool.
Yes.
It's not me. It's not Allison. It's from one of the people who lives in our church. And a lot of the times the folks have signed their name, and so they see
Just somebody else is a part of this movement.
somebody else's handful of candy. And then we have a $10 gift card to a local coffee shop, restaurant, breakfast place that's the hot thing around town. Is that all this goes into this?
That's it.
Yeah. And so those get sent out on Monday morning.
Yep. Just little priority mailbox
Yeah.
right to their house.
And it's that little free, and I think a lot of that free box was like, when you get a package in the mail, you're going to open it up.
Yep.
And there's a lot of space.
Who doesn't love a package?
I know. And so, like, you can shake it and it rattles around. Like, it's like curiosity kills the cat. It's right there. And so that's our first time system. And all that is checklisted in Trello. So we know it happens. And when the person comes on the second time visit, like Allison does, and she can tell if they're there. Because most of our visitors have kids.
Right.
And that's that kids check-in. That
Yep.
kids check-in is a thing. And I don't think anybody realizes how critical having kids check-in is for a visitor follow-up. Because it's that secret that nobody realizes. Oh, we're actually just gathering information.
Right.
And then they enter in their email list, and we'll talk about this email follow-up system later on. I honestly don't even know how fruitful that is.
The email follow-up system?
Yeah.
Because it's just
it's like it's an email sequence. Mm-hmm. And so the second that we put their email into our address, it spits out a generic.
Right.
And it's not that generic. And then there's an email that goes out a few days later about our vision. And then there's an email that goes out a few more days after that goes about like how to get involved at Foundry.
I think it's just dependent on how much someone uses email, because I know some people in our culture are still super tied to it, but some people only check it every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So I think it's dependent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've started doing something new that we'll kind of hit up in a second that I think is kind of taking the place of that I think is pretty effective. And so we go into the second time guest thing. So there's a second time column, and we probably need to go ahead and create a second time checklist.
Probably. That would probably be wise.
Yeah, so you hear us processing this out in front right now.
We're working.
Because this is what's going on. So Allison, when a second time visitor comes, what you've been generally giving them a phone call?
Yep. Or if I haven't already, personalized Facebook.
Yeah.
Another note or a note there.
Yeah. So, and also, like, don't realize now that texting and Facebook messaging is completely legitimate.
Mm-hmm. Right. And also at that point, if I haven't like physically met that person on a Sunday morning, make that a priority at that point. I mean, not that it's not a priority before that, but there's just so much happening, but really making that a priority.
Yeah. And so, because like you do a lot of coffee with people.
I do. Yep.
Yeah. You do more than I do with that. So pastor connections.
Do like some coffee.
And like generally, what I'll do on that second time visit, because if we've collected their phone number, I just shoot them a text message, and I'm like, "Hey, it was great to have you again. Da 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 da. This is my cell. If you ever need anything, let me know."
Right.
And if they reply back to me, that's the kicker. If they reply back to me, I then put them inside of a larger Foundry text message group that I have.
Oh yeah, I think that's been really great.
Yeah, and I generally send out a Friday or a Saturday morning text about Sunday, and so that person gets entered into there.
Yeah.
And especially when we had the flood a month ago, and we were really taking advantage of that text list. I think that's one reason we saw so much traction come up, because these people who'd been around a little bit might be coming once every 6 weeks, once every 2 months, or inside of that, saw like, oh my goodness, there's a lot going on.
Yep.
And so that text message thing. It's just like I said, like don't disregard the power of Facebook messages and text messages, especially if you're dealing with folks under 50.
Right.
I mean, especially with texting. I mean, it's ubiquitous now. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of goes to our first time visitor system, our second time visitor system, and the email system. And we'll put a link in the show notes to Bobby Williams has an episode of Unseminary where he goes out about an email system for his church. And that's where I really took the cues from with this. And I'll link to that in the show notes. That's the guy to learn this from. So it's right there, another free resource. It's like our Facebook system. Mm-hmm. And I've written about this before, but it pretty much, and I'll link to the blog post where I really detail this out, but it's all about leveraging the power of Facebook lists.
Yes.
Because Facebook lists allow you to spit out status updates to specific groups of people. And it makes them it instead of blasting your whole entire Facebook friend list with stuff, but it does something to disrupt Facebook's algorithm to who sees things, and it's a higher likelihood that the people in that Facebook list are going to see this announcement or whatever you're making. And so what I do now is, and it also helps you out with inviting on Facebook events, all that kind of stuff. Yep. And so whenever anybody likes Foundry's Facebook page, I immediately go and I check. And if we have more than like 5 mutual friends, I send them a friend request. And I can generally even tell by who our mutual friends are, like what is the likelihood this person is going to engage with us, and what is the likelihood we might see this person at church.
Right. Yeah.
Because like you realize there's certain people that just gather folks around them. And so I've gotten to the point I can predict this. And so I send that person a Facebook friend request, and within 12 hours of them accepting it, I've got a generic message that I send them. I keep stored in Evernote, just copy, paste it over. If I know anything personally about them or we have mutual friends like that, I'll say something about it. But that requires a level of personal knowledge. And that's just pretty simple. It's like, hey, Pastor Foundry, thanks for liking our page. if you don't have a church that you regularly attend, I would love for you to think about us. Mm-hmm. Just kind of a generic thing. And so and then I also then drop them into my Foundry Facebook list. Yep. And so, I mean, there's probably 600 people in that list now, I think.
Wow. Yeah. That whole thing was magic to me at first, but
yeah, I showed it to you and you were
like, what? But it is, I mean, it's so fruitful.
It is. It is. And it's just, there's multiple reasons it's fruitful. And so that Facebook system's huge. And so it's the same thing. If person attends church, Facebook friend request, they get it, boom. As much as they're willing to reach out honestly towards you, I will reach back. Like if that person is not contacting back, I'm generally not going to bug them.
Right.
It's like I tell people all the time, like ministers are trying to get a prom date.
You do say that often.
Well, it is. It's like It's like trying to get a prom date. When you can tell the person is not going to go out with you, you go find another date. And I mean, we can either spend hours chasing one person down, or hours
cast the net wider.
Yeah. So that's one. And then our first time giving system. That's actually pretty simple.
It is.
We've got a product through the Rocket Company that's called "What Happens When You Give," and there'll be a link to that in the show notes. And what I just do is it's a little booklet that we send them, and then I write it has branded stationery that goes along with the book, and I just write that person a note and I thank them specifically for their giving, and that goes in the mail to them. So in theory, you'll have people like this past Sunday. We had a first time visitor who gave us their information and who gave. Mm-hmm. And they probably got 5 to 7 touches this week from us.
Yes.
And what we've heard from more people than not is they're like, we have never seen anyone that is intentional and reaches out.
Right.
Like y'all do. And it's been
it's
been beneficial.
And intentional and reaches out, but not in a weird way. In a like approachable within sort of bounds of how we do life anyways kind of way.
Yeah. And it's always, and that's kind of the perfect movement into this next piece. Because we just do what seems natural to this culture.
Right.
And so I sent out an email to the email lists and just said, hey, we're talking about this. What problems do you have with first-time visitor follow-up? And I got, I think, 30 emails back in the last 5 hours. And they all pretty much have to do with the exact same thing. And so the first kind of bigger conversation, Allison hasn't seen these yet, so we're just...
All right.
You ready to roll?
Sure.
Okay. Brett and Teresa Boat, this is what Brett emailed. He's a pastor up in Minnesota. He said, how do you gauge whether or not someone will be turned off by a phone call, visit, or other form of contact after visiting your church for the first time? How would you discern which form of contact would be best? Letter by snail mail, phone call, coffee, visit, etc. I think this is all cultural. Mm-hmm. I think it's all age.
I think that's a big factor.
And how old you are and how old they are. And also, like, Allison has a tremendous contact flow with a bunch of single 20-something women in the church. Mm-hmm. That if I contacted them the way that she does, my wife would be very mad at me, and they would be weirded out.
Right. Yeah.
And so this there's going to be cultural and social stuff that goes on around that. So, Allison, you're 26.
Yes.
Single.
Yes.
What would freak you out if someone reached out to you?
I think, I don't know if it would freak me out, but I know just a lot of folks in my generation, a phone call is not our first immediate sort of way of contacting. Like, I mean, the Facebook thing, even I've been surprised at the amount of traction that gets right off the bat. Like, people are more prone to Facebook message than text, even at some point.
It's driven both of us crazy a little bit because neither one of us natively goes to Facebook Messenger.
Right. It's a little strange, but I think there's still some, as personal and as intimate as Facebook can be, I think there's some degree of separation that allows people to sort of keep their boundaries while engaging in a genuine way. And so I think that's just really fruitful. I think at some point a call makes sense, but I would say sort of that would be the one that I would shy away from more immediately for folks my age.
I think that no matter what, and so we're United Methodist Church, and the visitor follow-up system that has been handed to us on a silver platter, and everyone goes gaga over, is Adam Hamilton's resurrection thing. They're muggings.
Oh, the muggings.
The infamous mugging. And so that you'd give their information on Sunday morning. I think he said for the first 5 years of that church.
Yes.
He hand delivered everyone, and I think he said every single
went
person
to their house. Yeah.
Yeah, and every single person who visited Resurrection, he said, ended up joining Resurrection.
Right.
But he would go to their house with a mug, and you can't see Allison rolling her eyes right now.
It's not. I get it.
It was 25 years ago.
It was 25 years ago.
If somebody came to my house on Sunday afternoon,
that's my nap time.
I know. Well, and even if I wasn't even if it wasn't in ministry, so Saturday afternoon, somebody comes to my house on Saturday afternoon, I'm max. I'm going to have to put on a real shirt.
Right.
I ain't got no shoes on. If I'm at the house, if you catch me at the house, I ain't doing nothing to come to the door.
Right.
And so I think that whole door time visit thing. And I grew up doing that. I mean, I just don't think I don't think a drop by visit is ever a good idea.
I agree.
Can you think of a situation?
No.
Okay.
I really can't.
Okay, yeah. And I think the phone call thing, to gauge that, I mean, if I don't recognize, if the number's not in my caller ID, I don't answer my phone
right
the first time. I let it go to voicemail.
So do I.
And so there's that piece. I really think that there's just some mail. I think mail contact is huge because nobody gets mail anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think figuring out culturally text message or Facebook. But I also think the more you're going to implement a Facebook strategy, the more you as the leader or whoever's actually sending it and doing it, they need to maintain a really good Facebook presence.
That's true.
That has to be sculpted and curated.
That's true.
And so if you've got a really, really bad Facebook presence, I don't think that'd be a good idea.
Right.
And so it's all about cultural and that sort of thing. It's not hard. It's pretty simple. And so so that's it. Now, another question we had tons and tons of is along the lines of when people do not choose to fill out a card.
Ah, yes.
So my first answer would be get a kids check-in system.
Right. Right. I mean, I think we're still sort of. I mean, this is a question that we
asked this question.
Like the Keltners, for example, they came for
months.
2 months and we never got their information, and now
have they ever?
Yes, it took a very, very long time.
I mean, honestly, that was a 3.5 month thing.
Mm-hmm. So.
And so
we're still asking that question too.
Yeah.
But the kids check-in is a great way to sort of alleviate some of that, I believe.
Yeah, just because people are going to be like, I don't know if you have information or not. Oh, I'm giving my child to you for an hour and a half. Yes, you need my information. Do we have cell phone? Do we have phone numbers off that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, great. So you can get their cell phone. So if that's the case, we can still text with that person. We can build up a contact system via text with that, and so that's good. When it comes to getting them to complete a connection card, because this is from Ashton Stewart. He said on Easter, estimated 80 to 100 guests, but only had a dozen cards filled out. Praise God, but that could be better. That could be better, but man, at 10%,
it's not too bad at all.
I mean, I hate to say that, but we probably had 80 to 100 guests on Easter Sunday. Mm-hmm. And I wish we would have had 10 cards.
Right.
Filled out. Now we had the visitor check-in, we had the kids check-in, which saved us.
Right.
But
right, and I think one thing that we're working on that has been more has gotten more traction is on Sunday mornings we tell folks if they're a first-time guest to stop by the front welcome desk, and we give away our tumblers to them. And our hospitality folks that have been doing that sort of giveaway moment have been reminding people or asking them to make sure they filled out a connection card. And I know that's actually been improving as far as increased in first-time visitor
I
giving.
would say there's a lot of folks. Michael Lukaszewski was the first person I really heard about this. I would give away something as awesome as you can afford to guests there at church. And I know that I hear about people talk about fresh loaves of bread and cookies. My friends are school teachers, so we throw that stuff straight away because I don't know where it came from, where it trusted. I know that has to be tough on a lot of older churches or a lot of more family, church family. That's the word that we're not allowed to say in our staff. Because your home church, Grace still does cookies.
Maybe, yeah.
I ate one 2 years ago because I was the first one over there. I ate 10 of them.
Nice.
And they bake them there at church and stuff. But I don't think that the whole food thing it's all cultural.
Right.
And so we have the Tumblr. Those end up costing us like $6 a pop to make. They look cool though. And if they have however many they want, like if they show up with 6 people in the family, 2 adults and 4 kids, they want 6, I'll give them 6.
Yep. And that they can take that with them at work, at school, wherever.
Yeah.
So
And so it's just that I think that gift, and it's also I think intentional language of not saying visitor but saying guest. I think that you want to make them. It's like Nelson Searcy is he's written about every single thing in church. Like I'm surprised he didn't have like a 10-step method of changing toilet paper in your bathroom book. But he wrote, his whole thing is you want to reward the behaviors that you desire, and so. You make sure you get it. So that question was asked a lot about people trying to get information from folks, and so that's a huge thing. We go through and see if we have any others that are kind of not that. Second time visits. We had several people. Tepper emailed and asked about that. So Tepper from the Threshing Floor, another podcast I host. We talked about second times. I think it's just you increase the experience. But I think that the way that you increase the experience with second times folks is we're still in a lot of ways doing some more organic work with our second time follow up. But I think a lot of it is about getting them to engage.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Not contact.
Right.
But engage.
That's sort of the point that engagement conversation and thought process begins.
Yeah. Jonathan Bevel, another friend of mine, he asked this. I think this is the last one that kind of covers all the new stuff. He has a lot, but I think it's good. So the first one, how do you capture people's contact info? I had never seen a sign-in sheet or anything like that asked for my information until I became a Methodist.
Really?
I did not. So growing up in Baptist churches and being part of like a ginormous Baptist church.
Yeah.
Like my dad's church is 2,500 people, and I asked him at first-time visitors. And he's like, my staff can just see them. Like they have no way to collect.
Right.
Unless they come to Sunday school, they have no way to collect it. I'm just like, seriously? How? Why? Really? I'd be curious to know because at Christ Church, the big non-denominational church here in town, does a contact card.
Right.
In fact, we completely almost copied their format of contact card when we did ours. And so get a contact card. Their picture of ours will be in the show notes, but it's super. We don't have a bulletin or anything else. It's super low key, and we ask everybody to fill them out. And like I'm looking at a stack of them right now, and a lot of times people will just put their family's name in there. That's cool.
Yep, it's helpful.
Yeah, it's helpful. So we have that. After the service, how do you make contact with these folks? Who contacts? I think that as many. I think the way that we have 3 different people reaching out right now. So we have the family, whoever dropped a card in the box, and then me and you. I think that's totally appropriate. And also, something Nelson Searcy says, and I have no problem with this. We've never done this before, but like, if something happened, I've told people, folks, just sign my name. Like, if you really, really have that little time in your hand to write a first-time visitor follow-up note to someone, but you feel it has to be from the pastor.
Oh, yes.
Just let that person sign your name.
Sure.
And so, build a team around it. Just get it done. But really and truly, this takes us maybe 2 hours a week to run through.
Yeah, and the more streamlined it's gotten, the faster it's gone.
It's just boom, boom, boom. You trained Molly, our other staff person, last weekend in no time at all. And then I think that the follow-up for later on down the road, I think every single time they come and every time you contact more, you're consistently trying to pull them inside in the way you communicate. So if I see someone at church for like the 3rd or 4th time, I immediately, the next person I see that I know their name, like, hey, you need to meet so-and-so.
Right.
Even if they don't really need to whatsoever at all. I'm connecting them to people.
Right. And then points of engagement, which for us has a lot to do with ministry teams and serving.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
So
it's just that. I think the last thing is just learn to keep contact with people. Like, how many people in the church do you think you have some form of contact with during the week, Allison?
Oh, probably over the course 50. That's a really good week, but between sort of all of this contact between systems and of our volunteer systems contacting, that's probably about.
Like, I go down my list and I text five families a day, and that kind of stuff. Seeing people. I think the more that you can just reach out and contact, and I think for us the leverage of text messaging has been just super gigantic.
Huge. I think it's such a relational thing too for folks. I mean, some people not, but for some, I think sort of a core of a relationship I now have with people has come from running them through these systems.
Yeah. It changes everything. And so just realize that this is the place to be as relational as you possibly can manage doing it. Okay, one last question. I realized this was there, and I wanted to see it. So Darian Heibel, Darian, I hope I pronounced your last name right. I'm from the South. I apologize. He said engaging members of the congregation in this process to see it as important. What strategies do you suggest for a congregation that's more in-reach than outreach?
So other folks outside of...
Well, I guess if the congregation just does not see visitor follow-up and visitors, period, as a big thing. What do you have?
I'm just trying to think. It's hard just since we are such a new operation in our, a new community, and that seems like such a thrust. But I know for existing churches, that's a pretty significant question, and one that hasn't really been on the forefront of my mind recently. But that's huge.
I think a lot of it is. I mean, I went to Darian's church's website, and it's a Lutheran church up in the Midwest, and I also in the main line. So your Lutherans, Presbyterians, Episcopals, Methodists, all those churches, they naturally are a little bit less evangelistic,
right?
There's also a couple of theological moves that we take that can lend towards less evangelism as well, like our own. I mean, so the culture, there's a little bit of a different spread there. Mm-hmm. But I think that no church wants to not be healthy. And I mean, and Darian, this is a pretty big one because there's some other questions I would want to ask alongside of this. But I think just letting your people see the fact that we are called to reach out to people, and and that's just that message has to be on the forefront of things. Because if people are automatically assuming everyone has a church home, they're going to have no desire to even realize the reality. I would start counting them though. I was at a church one time that there was this myth and legend that we had no first time visitors, hardly ever at that church. And I started counting them, and people were blown. Oh, we know, no, and I was trying to instill a system like this, and they're like, "Well, we have one every now and then." I'm like, "No, we had 9 last week."
Wow, yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, really?" And it's like, "Yeah, we usually have 4 to 5 every week, and we've not taken in a member in 14 months." And it was just intentionality.
Right.
All it was lacking was intentionality. So, right. Darian, the first thing I would say is start counting your visitors.
Right.
I mean, just start realizing who that is. And here's the thing. This is a pretty simple system, with the exception of our church folks writing these cards. This is staff run and staff led. And I think most people, their first form of contact after visiting a church, they want to hear from someone who's on staff. And so I would just say, just start leading this and just present the information to your congregation as you're starting to see fruit off of it.
I would agree.
Okay. Well, Allison, you have to has to catch a jet plane to England tomorrow.
I do.
And so she gave up some of her last afternoon lounging about.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Hey, doing some things.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Allison. So that was a deep dive, super deep dive, but I still think it's a great example of how people think through these sorts of things and really the power of intentionality. So the next episode, we're going to go into working and keeping systems, something that as my life is becoming more complex. I'll share more about that in the next episode as well. That I'm just relying on significantly, the power of having those two systems. And so be prepared for episode 61 as we jump into those systems. Hope you're having a good summer. Hope you're getting some time off. I did a little bit a couple weeks ago, and I'm about to a little bit more in a few more weeks. Hope you're resting well. Come hang out in the private community on Facebook, and we'll see you on the internet.